Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a new life story. Let's begin.
They all laughed. Not a hearty, loving laugh. No, the kind that happens behind closed doors and over expensive wine, when everyone agrees on who the fool in the room is. My mother turned her head slightly, feigning surprise, but her lips twitched with amusement. My father didn't even try to hide it. He leaned back in his chair and muttered just loudly enough, $17? Seriously? I sat still, palms against my knees, as the room blurred around me. The estate lawyer, Mr. Halverson, cleared his throat but didn't look up. He had just finished reading the will of my grandfather, the man who once let me ride on his shoulders through the vineyards of his California estate, the man who once called me his true spark. Now I was the girl who inherited 17 US dollars. Not a penny more. No property, no explanation, no dignity. The smirks around the room widened. My cousin leaned forward, pretending to console me while visibly fighting off laughter. My aunt whispered something behind her palm. My brother Alex didn't look at me at all. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch as he skimmed the document outlining his share. Multiple properties, stocks, a vintage car collection. My mother crossed her legs slowly, elegantly, like we were at brunch and not witnessing a public execution. Then the attorney added, "And there is a sealed envelope, addressed to Vanessa." His voice dropped slightly. "Private, to be opened in her presence only." That's when the smirks stopped. All eyes turned to me. My father's lips parted, just a bit. My mother stiffened. The pageantry of their ridicule flickered, revealing something beneath it: uncertainty. Because they hadn't expected that. A letter? Just for me? My grandfather had been many things: a cold strategist, a ruthless businessman, but he never made random moves. If he left a letter for me, there was a reason. I took it silently when the lawyer passed it over the table. The envelope was ivory, thick paper, closed with a wax seal. Just my name, Vanessa June Archer. My full name. No pet names, no sweetheart, no Nessa. The formality of it was louder than any scream. I didn't open it in front of them. That night, I drove back to my one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. I didn't have an ocean view, no private driveway, just a rented parking space and a creaky elevator that sometimes jammed between floors. I placed the envelope on my kitchen table and stared at it for 10 minutes before finally breaking the seal. The letter was short. "Vanessa, if you're reading this, you've already seen what I left you, or rather, what I didn't. You were always different, and that terrified them. $17 isn't an insult, it's a key. There's more, but you'll have to decide if you want it. Go to the place where you first showed me what courage looks like. If you're ready to build something that's yours, not theirs, start there. G." I read it 5 times. $17? As a key? I didn't know what he meant at first, but the moment I read, "where you first showed me courage," I knew. He was talking about the summer I was 15. That summer, I'd refused to wear the family uniform. Not literal, but close enough. Structured blazers, pastel blouses, ballet flats. I'd shown up to the annual Archer Estate dinner in combat boots and a black dress with a frayed hem. I was the only one without pearls, the only one with chipped nail polish and eyeliner that didn't match the brand. I remember the horror on my mother's face, the quiet disapproval on my father's. But my grandfather, he'd looked at me, raised a glass, and said, "There she is." That night, he pulled me aside in the garden. "You don't match them," he said, sipping from his tumbler. "Don't try to." It was the first time I felt like someone saw me. Now, years later, after being gifted 17 humiliating dollars and a letter laced in mystery, I realized he still did. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled out every old memory, every moment that felt out of place in my family's perfectionist narrative. My brother being praised for business deals at 17, me being scolded for having paint on my hands, Alex inheriting my grandfather's mansion in Tiburon, me inheriting $17 and a cryptic note. But something inside me shifted, because now I had a direction, a choice, a map etched in memory and pain, and no one, not even my parents, knew what I would do with it. I hadn't been to the vineyard in over a decade. It was tucked away in the hills outside Santa Celeste, a coastal town known more for its weekend art markets and overpriced bed and breakfasts than for legacy estates. My grandfather's vineyard sat on a plateau above the fog line, where mornings were gold and afternoons stretched lazy and long. When I arrived, everything looked smaller than I remembered. The gravel crunching under my boots, the warped wooden gate with the initials GA carved into the side. It used to feel like a fortress. Now it felt like something left behind in a dream. I parked near the old garage, still padlocked, and walked through the side path that led to the back patio. The same table was there, same sun-bleached chairs, the stone bench where I once read books for hours to avoid my mother's long lists of expectations. The vines had grown wilder, curling around trellises like they'd stopped trying to impress anyone. I half expected someone to yell, "You can't be here!" But no one came. Just silence. And wind. The letter hadn't said what I was supposed to find, just that there was more, and it would begin where I once showed him courage. That moment when I'd stepped away from family tradition, worn black instead of blush, refused to be sweet and silent for guests I didn't trust. That dinner ended with my mother in tears and my father's jaw tight with fury. But my grandfather? He brought me a slice of lemon tart after the guests left and said, "Every empire has one who walks away and builds better." I didn't know what he meant then. Now, maybe I did. Inside the house, everything was covered in white sheets. I found the key in the flower pot, where he always left it. The front door creaked open, and for a moment the scent hit me. Dust, lavender oil, old paper. Like time had stalled. I walked through slowly, uncovering pieces one by one. The piano in the sitting room, his library lined with cracked leather spines and Polaroids of cities he'd loved, a wall of framed sketches, most of them mine, drawn as a child and slipped onto his desk when no one else wanted them. There was one drawing I'd forgotten about. A crooked house on a cliff, waves crashing below, and a girl standing alone at the edge. I must have been 10. I hadn't even signed it, but he had framed it. That nearly broke me. I wandered into his study next, the room where deals were struck and secrets sealed. His old desk was still there, the safe behind the bookshelf, too. I tried the combination I remembered, his wedding date. It clicked. Inside was a folder, thick, sealed in twine, labeled simply Vanessa Contingency. My heart dropped. Inside were papers, dozens, bank statements, ownership documents, photographs, notarized letters, a property deed in Oregon, a list of names, a startup proposal stamped and signed with his initials. And on the first page, in the event that Vanessa is cut off by her parents, proceed with the following. I sank to the floor. He had planned for this. According to the documents, my grandfather had transferred ownership of a parcel of land in Portland to a trust in my name 2 years before he died. It wasn't a vineyard. It wasn't a mansion. It was a rundown 2-story building once used as an artist's studio and storefront. But it was mine. No conditions, no contracts. And there was more. A letter from him to an old friend named Roland Kane, dated 3 months before his passing. If Vanessa comes to you, show her what we talked about. She won't understand it at first, but she will. She always sees the structure beneath the story. I didn't know who Roland Kane was, but I knew what I had to do next. I drove back to the city at dusk, the sky bleeding orange and rose behind me, the Pacific stretched wide and cold to the west. In my lap was the folder, the key to a new life that no one in my family ever expected me to have. When I got home, I pulled up everything I could on Roland. Turns out he ran an independent design firm in Portland, specializing in community renovation and social housing projects, the kind of architect who didn't just build buildings, he built neighborhoods with dignity. I emailed him that night. 2 sentences. My name is Vanessa Archer. My grandfather said you'd know what to do. He replied the next morning. I've been waiting for this message. Can you come up next week? When I told my parents I was leaving town for a while, they didn't ask why. My mother barely looked up from her phone. My father shrugged. To them, I had already been written off. They didn't know they'd been erased too. A week later, I stood in front of that building in Portland. It was ugly, covered in graffiti, shuttered windows, the faint smell of mildew in the air. But when Roland met me outside and opened the door, he said, "This space has potential. But more than that, it has history." He showed me the inside, wide beams, old brick, skylights that filtered light like a cathedral. He handed me a set of blueprints and a thick binder labeled The Collective. Inside were pages of plans drafted with my name in the margins. A community arts center, affordable studio rentals, a nonprofit attached, all designed by my grandfather in secret. He started this for you. He wanted you to have something that couldn't be taken away. I stood there for a long time. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a mistake in the family mold. I felt like a foundation. Something was beginning. I didn't post about the building on social media. I didn't tell friends, and I definitely didn't tell my family. It was the first thing in my life that belonged only to me. For the first time, I was no longer reacting to the world my parents had placed me in. I was creating my own. Roland connected me with a small team of contractors and restoration experts, people who weren't impressed by last names or legacy, but could see potential in cracked beams and forgotten corners. We met every morning at 7 a.m. to drink bad coffee and argue about lighting, safety codes, and budget limitations. I loved every second of it. The building was in worse shape than we expected. We had to tear out whole walls, rewire the electric, deal with mold. It was brutal, expensive, exhausting. And for once, I wasn't just photographing transformation, I was living it. I slept on a friend's couch nearby for 2 months, showered at the local gym, and ate more instant ramen than I'd care to admit. But every night I fell asleep thinking, this is mine. Not something handed to me out of guilt, not something assigned to me like a family duty. This was what freedom felt like. It started with one room. We got the plumbing working, laid new flooring, painted the walls in a rich, deep gray that made the sunlight feel like it belonged there. I set up a table with secondhand chairs and opened the windows for the first time in years. It smelled like hope and primer. That first room became our base. From there, I began applying for permits and licenses. Roland helped me file paperwork for nonprofit status. We named the project the Anchor Studio, a place for artists who had nowhere else to create and nowhere else to be seen. I remembered how it felt to be told photography wasn't a career, to be mocked for making mood boards, to be given $17 while my brother inherited buildings. This space would be for people like me, people whose creativity had never been taken seriously, people who had always been expected to stay small. We hosted our first open call 6 months later. 12 artists showed up, painters, sculptors, dancers, and one retired teacher who built shadow boxes from reclaimed wood. They didn't look like the people featured in glossy galleries. They looked like community. We gave them keys, told them to create without apology. That was the rule. No pitches, no themes, no explanations. Just the right to make something. And then came the press. A small local reporter caught wind of what we were doing and ran a profile in the People Who Make Portland Better section. The piece was quiet, respectful, but something about it spread. We started getting emails, then phone calls, then donations. And then one afternoon, I got a message from someone with a familiar name, Cicely Hunt, my cousin. The same cousin who once called my self-portrait depressing and suggested I try something more cheerful, like watercolor flowers. She wrote, "I saw the article. I didn't know you were doing this. It's impressive. Maybe we could meet sometime. Just catch up." I stared at the message for 5 full minutes, not because I wanted to reply, but because I didn't feel the need to anymore. There was a time when I would have been desperate for her approval, when I would have drafted, deleted, rewritten, and agonized over the perfect response. Now, I just marked it as read and closed the tab. Months passed. The building transformed. So did I. We added more studios, more programming. We brought in trauma-informed coaches to support artists through blocks and burnout. We started hosting free community nights, open mic events, film screenings, storytelling circles. Our name spread. And still, I didn't tell my parents. They knew I'd moved to Oregon. They assumed I was doing something with art. They didn't ask questions, which was perfect, because they wouldn't have understood it anyway. Not the long hours, the scraping by, the joy that came from creating something real with no inheritance, no family favors, no boardroom strings. They couldn't have understood the power of being poor and proud at the same time. Then came the invitation from a local university. They were hosting a panel on alternative community infrastructure and wanted me to speak about the Anchor Studio. I thought about saying no. I wasn't a speaker. I didn't own a pantsuit. I still owed back taxes for our first fundraising event. But something told me I needed to do it. The panel was simple. A room of students, faculty, and maybe a few journalists. I wore my usual boots and a clean black sweater. I didn't talk about trauma or revenge. I didn't even mention the $17. I talked about building space from silence, about how the most important parts of a home aren't walls or floors, but whether people feel safe to breathe there. When I finished, the room clapped. Some people stood. A woman came up afterwards, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "You just described my entire 20s." I nodded and didn't say anything. Because for the first time in my life, my work was speaking louder than my pain. I walked out of that building into the cold evening air, and for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone's expectations on my back. Just my name and the studio and what came next. It was a Wednesday afternoon, gray and quiet. The kind of day where nothing urgent seemed to happen. Until it did. I was in the back room of the studio, sorting through a stack of grant paperwork, when someone knocked on the glass front door. We usually kept it locked during admin hours. Open studio times were posted clearly on the website, and most people respected the schedule. I wiped my hands on a cloth and walked to the front, expecting it to be a delivery, maybe a walk-in artist who had misread the hours. But it wasn't a stranger. It was my father. Standing there in a pressed jacket and polished shoes, the kind he used to wear to fundraising galas. His hair had thinned slightly, Graham now, but his posture hadn't changed. Tall, controlled, confident. Except his eyes didn't hold the same certainty. He didn't recognize me at first. I froze. So did he. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady. He glanced down at a flyer he held in his hand, one of our printed posters, then back at me. I'm looking for someone," he said. "My daughter, Vanessa Archer." I blinked once, then said, "You found her." The pause that followed felt like it split time in half. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His face didn't show emotion easily, but I saw it then. A flicker of something between disbelief and regret. It lasted only a moment, but it was there. "You didn't recognize me," he said quietly. I gave a small, polite nod. Most people would have launched into an explanation, a reunion, a cascade of emotional confrontations, but I wasn't most people anymore. I'd rebuilt myself from too much silence to start filling it with noise. "How did you find this place?" I asked. He lifted the flyer. "Someone sent it to your mother. Said the founder of this place was someone we used to know." Used to know. I nearly laughed, but didn't. He looked past me into the space, into the warm, lived-in studio where two artists were currently painting in the far corner, where music played softly over a secondhand speaker. The walls were lined with color and story and mess. It was nothing like the homes he curated with pristine art and cold tones. He asked, "What is this, exactly?" I replied, "It's a place for people who were told they didn't belong anywhere else." I watched the words land. He shifted slightly. "Your grandfather would have liked this." I tilted my head. "He built the first part of it, actually. You just never noticed." He didn't respond, and I didn't offer more. We sat at one of the front tables. It was surreal. This man who once told me I was wasting my potential, now drinking tea from a chipped ceramic mug I'd bought at a flea market. He kept looking around like he couldn't reconcile what he saw with the version of me he remembered. "Your mother doesn't know I came," he said. I didn't respond. "She's been going through things," he added. Still, I stayed quiet. He sighed. "I'm not here to make excuses." "Good. Because none would make sense anymore." He nodded slowly. "I suppose not." I waited. And then, finally, the question came. "Why didn't you tell us?" About this. About everything. I almost laughed again. "Because you never asked." He flinched. Not dramatically, but it was there. A blink, a swallow, a shift in breath. "I'm sorry," he said. It was flat, formal, but real. "For what?" I asked, genuinely curious. He looked at me. "For not seeing you." That did sting, because it was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging anything. I stood. "I have to get back to work." He rose too, folding the flyer with slow, deliberate movements. "If you ever want to have dinner, just talk. We live in Millshore now. The address is the same." "I know," I said. Another pause. He looked like he wanted to hug me, but didn't dare, which was good. I wasn't ready. He left without another word, and the moment the door shut, I exhaled the breath I never realized I was holding. That night, I sat in the studio long after everyone had gone. The lights were low, the room smelled of turpentine and clay. I stood by the window, arms crossed, staring into the street. He hadn't come to reclaim anything, but he had come to see. That was new. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew this. I wasn't a ghost anymore.
The next one to appear wasn't my father. It was my brother. I didn't see him coming. He didn't knock. He just walked through the doors of Anchor Studio one bright Thursday morning while we were hanging a new series of watercolor panels in the front corridor. I turned, half expecting a volunteer, and there he was, Alex Archer, in a fitted navy suit, shoes so polished they reflected the light, and the same calculating expression he wore at 16 when he accidentally erased my photography folder from the family desktop. "Vanessa," he said, smiling too wide. "So this is where you've been hiding." "I haven't been hiding," I replied. He let out a quiet chuckle, looked around, and then added, "This is very Portland." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an insult either. Just the kind of polished neutrality that Alex had perfected over the years. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't ask why he came. I let the silence stretch. He stepped further into the room, trailing his fingers along the edge of one of the reclaimed wooden display tables. "I saw the press feature and the TEDx talk. You're quite the public figure now." "That wasn't the point." "I know. That's what makes it more impressive." He turned to me, tilting his head. "Did you know Dad came to see me after visiting you?" I shook my head. "He didn't say much, just that he might have underestimated you." "That sounds like him." He studied me. "You know, you always made everything harder than it needed to be." There it was. The Archer family creed. If it wasn't neat, clean, structured, profitable, it was harder than it needed to be. I didn't rise to it. He sighed. "Look, I came here because Mom wants to host a family gathering next month for Granddad's birthday. He's gone. She still wants to mark the day. She said she'd like you to come. As family." I blinked. She said that. She did. There was a time when that single sentence would have shattered me with hope. A time when I would have read into it, believed it meant change, redemption, softness. Now it felt like someone handing me an invitation to a party I already outgrew. "I'll think about it," I said. That was the truth. Alex hesitated, then added, "He left more than just that old building, you know." "What do you mean?" He looked away. "There's another letter, one you never saw." It took him a week to send it. A scanned document with my name and my grandfather's careful handwriting. This one wasn't about property or plans. It was just words. "Vanessa, there are two kinds of inheritance, what you're given and what you build from what you weren't. I had to leave most of the world to your parents, but I left the work, the soul of our name, to you. Because you are the only one who knew how to listen to silence, the only one who saw people instead of profit. Don't ever think you got less. You got what mattered." I sat with that letter all night. Didn't sleep, didn't cry, just let it settle. I had always believed I was the one cast aside. Now I wondered if I was the only one he trusted to hold the part that couldn't be measured. The family gathering was 2 weeks later. I didn't RSVP, but I went. Not for reconciliation, not for drama, just to see. The house was filled with the usual crowd: pearl necklaces, monogrammed cuffs, thin smiles stretched across old grudges. My mother looked up when she saw me and blinked 3 times like she wasn't sure I was real. "You came," she said, her voice brittle. "I did." She nodded back, smoothing down her skirt. "You look well." I nodded back. "I am." Alex walked up behind her. He said nothing, just gave me a slight nod as if to say, "You've earned your place." But I didn't need a place at their table anymore. I had built my own. During the evening, someone brought out a photo album, old prints from the vineyard, from the estate in Sonoma, from holidays I hadn't been invited to in years. Then someone found a photo from that infamous dinner, me in black, eyeliner heavy, boots scuffed and arms crossed. "God, remember how dramatic you were?" My cousin Cicely laughed. I looked at the photo, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. "Yes," I said, "I remember exactly who I was." They didn't understand, but that was okay, because I did. They never said I'm sorry. Not really. My mother hugged me as I left the gathering, a light, careful embrace, like she didn't want to wrinkle her blouse or let the moment linger long enough to feel anything. "You've grown," she said, eyes not quite meeting mine. I almost answered, "Yes, without you," but I didn't. Some silences are better left undisturbed. My father walked me to the door. He looked older than I remembered, not in the hair or the skin, but in the way he stood, like the years had finally caught up with his certainty. "I heard the mayor mentioned your studio in a speech," he said. He did. That's commendable. It was the closest he would ever come to pride. I took it like a fossil. Cold, rare, but a record of something that once lived. Back in Portland, the studio was humming. We had just launched a new residency program for artists recovering from incarceration. The waiting list stretched for months. A local philanthropist had funded an annex expansion. We were hiring our 4th staff member. Sometimes I walked through the space in the evenings after everyone had gone, just to remember. I'd touch the paint-splattered tables, trace the brush marks still dried onto the sinks, and reread the names etched into the welcome wall. Every single one of them had a story. And now, so did I. One day, while sorting through an old drawer of paperwork, I found the envelope again. The first letter, the one with the $17 attached. I'd kept it sealed in a plastic sleeve, not because it held value, but because it marked the turning point. I took it outside and sat on the studio's back steps, holding it in my hands like an artifact. $17. Once that number felt like a slap, a dismissal, a neon sign spelling unwanted. Now, it felt like a spark. Because that's what he'd meant, hadn't he? That money was never about the amount. It was about the choice. Would I sit in the insult or build in spite of it? Would I see myself the way they did or the way he once had? I took the $17 bill from the sleeve, 2 crumpled tens, one ripped slightly at the corner, and I walked to the studio's donation jar, still sitting near the door. Slid them in without ceremony. Let it go. Let it become part of the whole. I never moved back home. Not even close. But a few months later, I invited my parents to the studio's 5-year anniversary celebration. I didn't expect them to come, but they did. My mother wore pearls. My father wore his press smile. They walked through the gallery like tourists,
confused, curious, cautious. They nodded at the installations, lingered at the sculpture garden, asked polite questions. Then they reached the plaque by the entrance. It read, Anchor Studio, founded in memory of Gabriel Archer, for the creators who were never given permission, for the ones who kept making anyway. They stood there for a long time, didn't speak, didn't move. And in that moment, I knew. They understood now. Not everything, not the years, not the pain, but enough. Sometimes people ask me if I've forgiven them. It's a strange question. Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process, a decision you make again and again, not to let the past drag you down like an anchor tied to the wrong ocean. My parents were never monsters. They were just scared, obsessed with control, desperate to preserve an image I never wanted to live inside. They raised me to believe love had conditions, but I learned to create something unconditional. I built a place where people can walk in and say, This is who I am, and hear, You belong here. No performance, no perfection, just truth. That's what I got instead of an apology. And it was enough.